Okay. I know there's many people trickling in, but we have a really packed agenda for this for today's webinar. My name is Angela Giacchetti. I lead engagement and communications for the Open Mobility Foundation. As more folks join, I'm just going to go over some quick housekeeping and tell you a little bit more about what you're going to hear about today on today's webinar. So we are going to be going over an introduction to the CURB data specification, which is an open source data standard that we at the OMF steward. You're going to hear from pretty much everyone on our staff. So you'll get to meet everyone kind of behind the OMF. And we also have a special guest joining us, Connie Llanos, who is just a force in this world. She's a former member of the OMF Board of Directors, former head of LADOT, and now is running a communications firm and really helping cities do that work at a larger scale. And so she will also be speaking with us today. Couple just again housekeeping things. Feel free to drop your questions in the Q&A box at the bottom of the screen throughout the webinar. We'll have about 15 minutes at the end for Q&A, and anything that we don't get to, we will try to address offline. We will send several follow-up resources to everyone after this webinar is over, and also it's being recorded. So you'll have the opportunity to share this as well. And with that said, I'm just going to get us started with just a quick poll. Again, while everyone's coming in, just curious to know what level of familiarity everyone has with the CURB data specification. So one being you're a complete noob, you've really not heard of it before, and 5 being, you might be able to lead this webinar or maybe ready for the 201 version. So drop your responses in there, and I'll give just like 30 seconds more for everyone to respond. But it looks like maybe we have quite a few kind of mid-level folks, generally know what it is, but wanting to learn how it works and who's using it. And again, I'm going to get us started real quick because we have a packed agenda. Okay. So I think you can maybe see the results. Again, lots of level 3s in there. So we'll try to tailor this best we can to that. Okay. So without further ado, I am going to, now I'm sharing the results. Sorry, this is a new thing for me. So without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to OMF's Executive Director, Andrew Glass Hastings, just to give some more context on the OMF and what we do.
Thanks, Angela. Hi, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Thanks for joining. Really excited about the program today and our opportunity to take a little bit of a step back and have a little a level set on the CURB data specification, a little more about what it is and how it's being used and its potential going forward. But first, I want to take a moment and very briefly tell you about the Open Mobility Foundation. If you're not super familiar, the OMF is a global nonprofit public-private partnership, really with the mission to convene cities and private companies to transform the way cities manage mobility and public space in the modern era. And we do that by co-creating open source data standards like the CURB data specification. But in other words, what does this really mean? It means that we're helping cities go from managing physical infrastructure, like you see on the slide today, to managing digital infrastructure. The types of mobility services and systems and digital infrastructure that we see in cities today, literally on the streets, as we're either requesting an Uber ride or looking to pay for parking via a mobile app. So again, we're really going from that physical infrastructure, what you see made up from signs and from people and from the actual physical meters, to now managing this digital infrastructure space. All right, and yep, there we go. Just the effect of going from old to new. The OMF vision really focused on creating this digital infrastructure to help cities manage this space for the public good. The OMF is a city-founded and city-led organization, and we're focused on developing open source data standards that are free and open, available for everyone to use, focused around this public-private collaboration. The work we do is founded upon the premise of bringing the public sector and private sector together to contribute to develop these tools, with the understanding that no one can do it on their own. It really does literally take a village in this sense to contribute to the development and the furthering of open source specs like CDS and the mobility data specification, which is the other spec that we steward. And we do this through this cross-sector relationship that really focuses on this makeup of public agencies and private companies. We're a membership organization, 50 plus members, both on the public side that you can see here, and also some really strong private sector partners working with our cities, counties, regional MPOs every day to assist this transition into managing digital infrastructure. I'm gonna take a pause there and actually come back to this slide, because as Angela mentioned, we've got someone who's pretty special to the OMF to give you a little bit of a higher level sense of the why. Why does CDS matter? Why does this transition to digital infrastructure matter? And so I want to introduce Connie Llanos, founder and CEO of CeeLo Strategies Communications, former acting director of Los Angeles Department of Transportation, and an incredibly good friend of the Open Mobility Foundation. I want to turn it over to Connie to spend a couple moments telling you a little bit more about kind of the why behind what we're doing here. Thanks,
Oh,
Connie.
thanks so much, Andrew. And it is such a pleasure to talk to folks at the OMF. It always kind of feels like coming home. Because the Open Mobility Foundation was such an important part of the almost 5 years I spent at the Los Angeles Department of Transportation. One of the reasons I come from a background of communications, journalism, politics. I always understood the incredible significance of transportation, but I was really attracted to this critical moment in time. Think back to we're 2018, right? We're sort of in the throes still of trying to manage for rideshare on our streets. We're starting to really accelerate the conversation around autonomous vehicles, and even autonomous flying vehicles, right? Or now what we call advanced aerial mobility. And then all of a sudden, you have scooters descending, you have the explosion of EV car charging. You really start to see this real transformation of the public right of way, and the real momentum right around the private sector wanting to accelerate innovation. And in Los Angeles, I think there has always been a spirit of wanting to innovate. There's also, frankly, demand, right? You've got this complex city. We're notorious, fairly or not, for our congestion and our traffic. So getting people from point A to point B really is a critical function of the city writ large, and certainly of the Department of Transportation. But when we drill down and think about why these tools matter, it really is about giving cities the ability to actually play a role in shaping how this innovation can take place in their cities. By this work with the OMF, right? You're actually building the tools alongside your private sector partners who are wanting to better understand what your problems are and figuring out ways to solve them. And what that meant for LA, I think even before the pandemic, as I was sort of describing, that there's sort of environment of lots of different mobility providers and services wanting to descend on our streets, right? And how do you figure out how to incentivize many of these innovations who are going to actually mean a net positive for your city, while also still protecting the public right of way? I think during the pandemic, we really then start to grapple with how do you also meet the competing demands when you're talking about al fresco dining. We really had in LA a concerted effort to expand the usage of bus-only lanes. Oftentimes we were coupling bus-only lanes with protected bike lanes as well, really trying to leverage that multimodal reality for LA. You've got the explosion of deliveries of all kinds. You really then start to have even more challenges for how do you manage that really valuable real estate that is the curb. And wanting to maximize that usage for folks, right? Because being able to effectively leverage the curb meant survival or not for some of our businesses during that pandemic era, and even in those really critical years after the pandemic, which I feel like we're still sort of in, where businesses are still quite vulnerable, and in LA we're still seeing lots of restaurants and retailers struggle to stay afloat. And I think today, as I'm seeing a lot of our cities also now grappling with the reality of having these higher needs across the board in our cities, in particular when it comes to transportation and managing all of these different complex needs. And we're in a post-pandemic era, and pandemic era resources and funding are not there anymore. I mean, I can speak for LA, right? Grappling with shortage of staffing, right? And likely getting rid of some staffing to deal with budget challenges. You think about the valuable real estate that can be the curb and what it can mean for your city to be able to actually leverage that asset, effectively price it in a way that can bring critical revenue to the city and supports the businesses that benefit from that critical flexibility that you're building in. It becomes no longer a nice to have, but a must have. And in LA, we're really lucky. We started on this work early, partnering with the OMF and lots of partners who I saw named earlier, right? Private sector partners that have been longstanding members of the OMF. We piloted a number of different ways to leverage digital curb asset management. We were lucky enough to get the US DOT SMART grant to focus on digital curb asset management, which the LA DOT team is still furiously at work on. We've piloted zero emission loading zones and creative usage of some of the tools that you'll hear more about that leverage CDS to be able to really better understand how the curb is being used. And I think I'm excited to see what happens when we get past these pilot phases and really can operationalize a lot of this work. But as I mentioned, I think as city officials and city staff, being able to deploy tools that can maximize your limited resources and staffing that allow you to support innovation and incentivize some of those critical policy goals that you have, whether it be climate, street safety, mobility, added mobility options. These are not nice to haves anymore. They really are critical functions of DOTs. And I know for me, when I was at LA DOT, being able to have the partnership as well and go through some of these pilot phases and these test cases and have the benefit of being able to work with other cities and learn from each other and share best practices was also really, really critical. So in short, I think managing the curb really is the absolute next frontier for us as folks interested in making our cities run better and more efficiently, but also having our air be cleaner and having people have access to more options. It is critical. And not leveraging tools really just feels like a completely missed opportunity. So I'm sure you guys are going to hear a whole lot more about about how the work is moving forward. You know, the launch of CDS 2.0 was really exciting last year, and I know that the team has been working on lots of exciting updates since then. And they're probably going to share some other use cases from other cities, like Pittsburgh, who I know was in the headlines recently for some of their deployment of some of this work. So with that, it's a real pleasure. Again, thanks for the invitation, Andrew, Angela. I always appreciate being here and chatting with you all.
Connie, thanks so much. Thanks for joining us. And if you're interested in following up with Connie and understanding more of the work she's been involved with and leading this going forward, we'll drop her email address into the chat so you can follow up with her there. But you know, as we jump into the conversation here about the curb data specification, kind of what it is and how it's used, you know, I'm kind of reminded that this is really about taking the theoretical to reality, or the theoretical into practice. You know, it's really easy to sort of throw around these concepts of data specifications, but what does that actually mean for the work that we do, for our cities, for the outcomes that we want to see in our communities? And I really appreciated some of those points that Connie hit on there, because the curb is perhaps some of the most valuable yet undermanaged real estate in cities today. There's huge demands on that very precious limited resource. And there's real implications for safety around things like safe pickup and drop-off zones, or the minimization of double parking to prevent bike lanes from being blocked, a real safety issue for anybody on a bicycle. Climate change implications, reducing circling to reduce the emissions, or being able to use a tool like CDS to implement low or zero emission delivery zones in our cities to try to bring down delivery related emissions in our center cities in particular. And then of course, the efficiency of the system. These are things that we know we have broader goals as communities and as cities. And you know, CDS is no longer just this theoretical concept, but now is the reality of helping to drive forward some of these goals. It's wonderful to see so many familiar names joining us today, and many new ones as well. It really focused on kind of broadening the community here within the OMF and those that are looking to engage and use the curb data specification and these tools to help make this transition to digital infrastructure a reality. All right, with that, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Mitch, who's going to take us into a little bit more detail on the curb data specification. Mitch?
Good morning, everybody. I'm coming to you from Minneapolis, and my task is to explain to you how CDS works. So if you're not able to change your answers that you put into the poll at the beginning, at the end of this, that'll be on me. We're going to do this at a 101 level, so I'm not going to go too far into the weeds. But if you have questions about things that I don't cover, get them into the Q&A and we'll try and answer them at the end. So CDS currently defines 3 APIs, which are called curbs, events, and metrics. The curbs API allows a city to digitally represent their curb space and communicate their curb policies and regulations to curb users. The events API is for the collection of event data related to curb usage. And then the metrics API uses that event data and defines methods that can be used to calculate things like dwell time or occupancy or other aggregated statistics that you can use to inform your curb policies. So what's an API? APIs are all around us and we use them all the time. And they work like a bridge that connect 2 software applications. If you've ever done any online banking, you've used an API. Another common example would be looking for flights online. So when you look for a flight online, you put in the dates that you want to travel and you put in your destination. The API transmits that information to the airlines. The airlines respond with a list of available flights. And what's interesting about that is that airline travel and booking is a very complex task, but by using an API, we're able to complete these tasks with almost no understanding of the underlying systems. CDS is a data standard that provides a blueprint for building APIs. And data specifications like CDS enable the exchange of information between parties where everyone who's involved can agree on what the information represents. So you can think of a data specification as being like a dictionary, where each term in the specification has a definition and a set of rules that define exactly how it can be used. This illustration shows an example of how CDS data might flow across three APIs. The city depicted in the top, in black at the top, sends curb regulation data via the curbs API, which is in green, to curb users that are on the street. Event data, which is depicted by the white arrow, is captured by things like pole-mounted cameras or pavement sensors, or it could be applications that are running in the curb users' vehicles. Once that data is captured, it could then be processed via, say, edge computing right there on the lamppost, or by a third party, or it could be transmitted back to the city. And then that data can be used in aggregate form and transferred back to the city through the metrics API, which is depicted by the yellow arrow. Now we'll go through each of the three APIs in a little bit more detail, starting with the curbs API. So the curbs API is really the backbone of the CDS specification, because it's used to communicate all of your curb locations and your curb policies and regulations to curb users. The data that's contained in the curbs API can come from lots of different sources. Your city might already have curb information that's stored in a GIS system or another type of database. That could be translated into a curbs API, or you may have to go out into the field and record the data using your measuring wheel and other tools to populate your database, which would then be used to populate your curbs API. Once you've collected the information, the curbs data would flow through the curbs API. You'd push it out to users on the street. Next, we have the events API. The events API is designed to transmit data on either real-time or historic events happening at the curb back to cities or to third-party partners. And it also gives you the ability to check on the current status of your sensors that are out in the field. So in the picture there, we see a pole-mounted sensor and a pavement-mounted sensor, and you would be able to use the events API to make sure that those sensors are functioning properly and sending data back to the city or to your third-party partners. There are a lot of different sources where events data could come from. It could come from sensors like are depicted here. It could come from curb user data feeds, so applications that are being run by curb users. It could come from your local parking enforcement. It could come from other city data sources. And once all of that curb data is collected, it can then be transmitted back to the city where it would be used in the metrics API, which we're going to see next. The metrics API defines calculation methods that can be used on that raw curb data so that you don't have to wade through mountains of raw data to calculate things like turnover and dwell time and occupancy percentage, so that you can use these things to inform your curb policies. There's a variety of ways that cities can benefit from using CDS. While you probably can't increase the amount of curb space that you have in your city, you can use CDS to improve the utilization of the curb space that you already have. You can digitize your regulations and capture curb usage data to help inform your policies and deliver the most value to the public. You can build better curb policies that can support community priorities like safety or sustainability or support for local business. When you're using CDS, you're able to take advantage of this marketplace of CDS tools and services that have been developed that can assist you in better managing your curb. And of course, CDS is not only relevant to cities, but it's also relevant to the businesses that are using the curb. If you're a company that's using the curb, CDS can provide you with real-time information. So to your vehicles that are on the street, about where the nearest available parking spaces are and what the rules are that apply to those spaces. This can allow cities to develop demand responsive curb policies so we can effectively price curb space and manage access to it. And that can provide businesses with greater access to the space that's available, especially in the places where demand is the highest. And then as new methods of mobility and delivery services evolve, these things can then be incorporated into the CDS specification. So both cities and curb users are going to be able to take advantage of them. And I'm going to pass it to Em.
Thank you, Mitch. I'm Em Burnett. Nice to see you all. I'm the program manager for the OMF's Smart Curb Collaborative. And the Smart Curb Collaborative I'm going to introduce in a second, but is going to provide a lot of CDS use cases. First, we'll get into where CDS is able to be used. It's a really flexible data standard, and CDS can be used to digitally share regulations. What's the parking regulation? What's the loading regulations? Determining if there is space at the curb, tracking and analyzing what times of day, historical curb usage, as well as helping with enforcement and optimizing to meet policy goals for things like a low emission or no emission delivery zone. And let's get into some of the cities. So CDS is used already in more than 14 public agencies by 22 companies and across 7 countries. That CDS users section of the working group page lists more here. If you happen to be on this webinar and you're using CDS and you're not on that page, please let us know. It's always good to know where the use cases are. Here are some of the wide variety of use cases. We're active in Omaha, Dublin, Seattle, Philly, and there's a lot of great vendors and companies, OMF members, who are actively using CDS and are great to partner with in these kinds of projects. So one of the use cases that we're really excited about is this collaborative. The Smart Curb Collaborative, this is part of the federal SMART grant that was awarded to a lot of cities, and 8 of whom in this latest cycle are all working on curb digitization projects, and are all utilizing CDS in these projects. So the collaborative is an effort stewarded by the OMF. It's a program that we're designing to help each of these member cities better learn from each other, share what their experiences is like as they're implementing this pilot, the pilots in their cities, and to advance CDS as a whole. We're also working with some great partners, the Bloomberg Harvard City Leadership Initiative, CityFi, Urbanism Next, and Urban Freight Lab out of University of Washington. So the collaborative is a great opportunity. It's probably the best use case of CDS we're going to see all in the next year or so. I'm going to give a little overview now of some of the projects. So this is not an exhaustive list. Each of the projects in these cities are unique. However, this is kind of a sneak peek at some of what we're going to start seeing in these collaborative pilot efforts over the next year. So CDS can be used, as mentioned, to pilot and implement something like a low emission delivery zone, low emission last mile delivery service. So that's something, if you set a policy or a regulation at the city level, you can use CDS to ensure that any delivery zone actually meets that policy goal. So in Portland and actually should have added here, Miami-Dade also have pilots that are focused around this specific use case. Seattle is piloting new digital commercial vehicle permits. So utilizing CDS in this manner to kind of implement a new potential program. San Francisco is creating a digital catalog of existing curb regulations, which is kind of a massive undertaking when you consider all of the data that and regulations that are associated with our curbs. And better understanding and communicating curb usage with real-time information is going to be a part of a lot of these projects, including especially those that are being piloted in San Jose, Minneapolis, and Philadelphia. CDS as a whole is just helping cities and able to help cities better understand the curb usage. So it's going to be really great to have these pilots live and be able to both implement and get feedback on CDS, as well as better understand how these larger cities in our country are utilizing the curb. There's also a pilot, part of Miami-Dade's project is about booking smart loading zones. And CDS can also be used to inventory every object on the curb, like what Los Angeles is going to be piloting. So that's benches, street signs, scooters, you name it. CDS is incredibly flexible. The projects right now in the collaborative are getting going. The process, we've been going through the procurement process, so working with a lot of those OMF vendor companies to start launching these projects. And we expect that through the spring, summer, into fall, we're going to start seeing a lot of information coming in about how CDS is used in all of these pilots. And we plan to use that to launch a new version of CDS thanks to all of these pilot initiatives. So it's a really exciting project. We're going to have a lot of varied information coming out throughout the next year. And to keep up with the collaborative, to see how these pilots are going, to learn from them, you can visit the OMF website. We're going to start adding information as these pilots develop. And part of the goal of the collaborative is to create resources so that other cities, whether they are members of the collaborative or not, can come to our website, can see how CDS has been implemented and get specific, tangible, hands-on resources so that you can implement a curb digitization project in your city. So we're not just learning from each other in the collaborative, but kind of helping advance curb digitization as a whole. So you can expect playbooks. We already have things like RFP language, early learnings from collaborative procurement models, and we expect to provide resources around just some of the challenges that cities face when piloting new technology like this, as well as some reflections on how successful these projects are. And we can expect that there's going to be another phase of this granting process. So some of these, almost all of these projects are just in a small pilot zone of each city, with the exception of San Francisco, which is cataloging the entire city and county of San Francisco. But the others are in a smaller pilot zone. And for any of the projects that move on to the second phase, there's a possibility that some of these smaller scale pilots can then be expanded into potentially the whole city. And that'll also be really exciting to see how that develops. So that's the CURB collaborative as it stands, and happy to take more questions in the Q&A for later.
All right, thank you. My name is Michael Schnerla. I'm going to go over with you what's next. I'm the Director of Open Source Operations for the OMF, and so what that means in this context is I manage the steering committee that manages the direction and approvals of the CDS releases, and those steering committees are made up of OMF members, both cities and companies. So let's see what's next. So 2 slides here about getting started with CDS. So the first one, here are some of the resources if you're really new to CDS, what you need to do first. So I would recommend starting with our About CDS webpage on the OMF website. It's very high level, gives you a good sense of what CDS is, how it works, how it fits together with some of our other our data standards, and what the benefits can be. After that, jump into the GitHub page. We have a CDS 1.0 release. It's about 2 years old now. And this is on GitHub, which is a technical resource to store code and other things like data specs and data standards. But it's really pretty readable. So especially the homepage there, it gives you a lot of links, resources, reasoning, explanations, and then even digging into those 3 APIs that Mitch mentioned on the GitHub page. Also, just read through it. It's really just the web page. It describes the details of each of these things, and eventually gets down to the field level. What fields do you have to share, which are optional, etc. But it really gives you a sense of what is possible with CDS. And by looking at that, you can start to connect the dots with your projects. Next is speak with your team and customers on how CDS might be useful in any or all of your upcoming HERB projects. As mentioned, CDS is very flexible. It can be used to define commercial loading zones. Some cities have used it to do all sorts of off-street parking, metered parking for regular non-commercial vehicle users. It can even be used for surface lots and other things like that. So very flexible. And if you have a curb project, it's likely CDS will be able to help in some way. And then we mentioned this a bit, but include CDS in your permits and RFP language. We have some sample language around this. And you really need to specify in many cases when you're doing your RFP or after you get the permit to use CDS, to talk about which version of CDS. Right now we're on 1.0, but that's important to say that when new ones come out, that you expect an update in a certain amount of time. So this language is very important, and we'll get into that on the next slide too. But the last thing here is there are also collaborative procurement options through Sourcewell, which we've developed as part of our USDOT Smart Grant Collaborative. So that's another option, which I'll show you in a second in our Getting Started guide. So we have created, the OMF staff and the steering committee has created a Getting Started guide for CDS. When launched, we had a pilot project guide. And this is a new iteration of that with more details and more learnings and more specifics over the last 2 years. It's available online through a link, and it includes learnings about the things you see here, different project phases for your curb projects. And it's not all about CDS. It fits CDS in where relevant, but it talks about everything from goal setting to planning, how you can implement it, a little bit about RFPs and things like that in the planning and goal setting phase, evaluation, outcomes of your project, some key things you need to consider if you're going to do technical implementation of each of the 3 APIs, who you need to bring to the table, who are the key players. We have a great project showcase in there, which has about 6 different cities who have already used CDS and links to what they've created, web pages, active public APIs, maps, etc. How to provide feedback. So if you find some need for CDS that it doesn't currently cover for you, you can give us that feedback and participate in the working group who helps develop new versions of CDS, and more about how to get involved if you want to set the direction of CDS or learn more or be a more active participant in the development or implementation of CDS. So it's a great guide, and we'll share it after the webinar. So now I'm going to pass it over to Aileen for a little bit more of a discussion of how to get involved.
Here we go. Hi, everyone. My name is Aileen McCallum. I'm the Director of Partnerships and Development at the Open Mobility Foundation. Really excited to see so many of you here. We've talked a lot already about OMF being a membership organization. But before we get to what membership means, I really want to just encourage you to get involved. And there are a lot of different ways to get involved depending on kind of where you want to plug in and what your technical level is and what your responsibilities are. So feel free to get engaged on the GitHub. We'll send links around for our GitHub account. That's where you can dive into the technical specifications that Michael and Mitch have been talking more specifically about. I really recommend signing up for our working group. Attending the CURB working group is open to anyone in the community. And so the way that you find out about this working group is simply just signing up for the mailing list. And then you can attend our public meetings. It's super easy to attend and work. If you're still not 100% sure about this, Or if you're really knowledgeable and you feel like you have something to contribute, this is a great way for you to speak up and give us some feedback. Just as a reminder, this is all open source and really relies on an active community for our products to improve and these specifications to improve. So really encourage you, especially if you have some technical expertise and experience to provide and weigh in on, we want to hear that. And then if you are a member, you can join the steering committee. And this is where, as the name suggests, you get to steer the conversation a little bit. Angela, let's move on to the next slide and we can talk a little bit more about membership. So membership is free for cities and government agencies to join. It's a relatively simple process as there's no funds exchanged, but there may be different levels of bureaucracy that your city or agency has to wrangle. But I'm happy to have that conversation with you. Private sector organizations do pay annual dues, and what I would love to do is set up a conversation with you. My email address is there. My Calendly is, I will get that shared out too. If you just want to schedule a meeting with me, if you're like, hey, I just want to learn more, just get the meeting scheduled with me. We don't need to go back and forth on email. And if you're still not sure about joining and you just, and maybe I'm a little scary on the Zoom, feel free to just click on our get in touch with the OMF link and we'll reach out to you about membership and answer any questions that you might have. With that, I think we are heading into Q&A. We have a lot of questions. We have a lot of questions that we want to have answered. You guys have been great. I love all the questions I've been seeing in the Q&A. So actually, I don't think everyone sending it off to. So hopefully that person will speak up. Thank you so much, Aileen. So I just one last thing. Here's where you can kind of get in touch with us online as well. I can also vouch for the fact that Aileen is in fact not scary and can kind of help get you in the right direction, point you to the right member of our team to answer any other questions that you might have and all that. But we will. I'm so excited to jump into Q&A. And yeah, I'll give everyone just a couple, 30 seconds to put more questions into the Q&A if you have them as they came up. And I'm going to stop sharing my screen and invite all of our panelists to turn on your video and we'll kind of answer these in a little bit of a panel format. And I'll help direct things. So, and I'll also try to do this based on what some of our most common questions are. So yeah, I'll do my best. And again, if we don't get to all the questions, we will share the slide deck afterward, which has a ton of resources, ton of links in it, and try to answer as many questions as we can offline as well. But let's see, there's one in here about, let me just try to find it, about tools, etc. So let's just start with, oh gosh, sorry, people are answering these. You know what, I'm going to pick one right here. Oh yeah, okay. Does OMF provide open source software tools for understanding CDS metrics? I'm going to kick this to Michael to answer first, and then other folks can jump in.
Yeah, that's a good question. We don't have that on our timeline or our roadmap. The way that metrics works is you as an agency would get all the activity data through the events API. So those are the individual events and transactions that happen at the curb. The conversion, and that's basically private information. So that's city information. It's not meant to be a public feed. The way metrics works is you can actually just use a simple formula to calculate from that to get to metrics. So getting to metrics from the event is pretty straightforward. I don't think you even necessarily need an advanced tool to do that. The metrics is powerful though, because it creates this standard way for everyone who's collecting activity at the curb whether it's within your own city or different types of activity, deliveries versus passenger drop-offs, et cetera, and even across cities and jurisdictions, to standardize that in a way through metrics so that they can be cross-compared and analyzed. So we're not intending to build a tool for that. If that is a need, though, you can definitely chime in on GitHub, and it's a discussion area. You can open an issue and just mention that as a need. But it should be relatively easy to, once you have the activity data, to create metrics.
Awesome. Another one for probably you, Michael, about CDS capability. So can CDS handle curb color, bus station, driveway, exit, crosswalk, etc.? Like, how detailed is it?
Yeah, I'll answer that. And there's another question I saw too about ADA, things like inventory regulations there, maybe also related to curb cut. So currently CDS can define some of those things, like it could say this is a handicap accessible area, curb drop-off zone. It can define them in general. One thing we are working on is a new feature called curb objects, which is different types of objects that can be at the curb. We saw this in the LA example from the SMART grant. These could be things that could impact or define that curb zone in more detail. So this could be the location and shape and material of a curb cut and a ramp. It could be where there is a tree or a bench or a meter that potentially could be blocking those spaces for some sort of access. It has a lot of different things in it. So if you can imagine something at the curb objects could potentially define this. And this is something we're looking at for version 1.1 of CDS, the next version, probably with some of the learnings we get from the SMART Collaborative. So short answer of that is it supports it a little bit now, but we want to support these things in a lot more detail. If you're interested, please look at GitHub, sign up for our mailing list for the public working group meetings. We discuss them a lot, these ideas, and we'd love your feedback.
And Michael, one of the areas that CDS does support ADA rules and regulations at the curb is that if a city has designated ADA spaces, handicap spaces at the curb today that have rules and regulations associated with them, those can be reflected in CDS and in fact can be part of that digital inventory. The API making it available as a resource for those trying to find those spaces in a city that may be difficult to find today. So you could actually have better information for the users or those who need those spaces to be able to find them through whether it's nav tech apps or other types of third-party parking software applications. So certainly as part of cities' curb rules and regulations, ADA can be included today.
I also just put in the curb objects discussion on GitHub. For those of you who are new to GitHub, I know I was when I started the OMF. In some ways, it works a little bit like a message board, right? So getting that discussion and feedback going on some of these topics is really important. It helps inform our work. It's sometimes it can be, it looks like an intimidating platform, but there is this kind of discussion feature that allows us to just, discuss asynchronously. So invite you to weigh in there. And Michael, I'm going to take you off of the Q&A seat for a moment. There's a couple other like more detailed questions that I would love to answer, but I want to switch gears to like how we talk about CDS, how we talk about this work, which can be really wonky and nerdy and sometimes hard to translate. But Josh has this awesome question here. What have you found to be the most compelling use case to demonstrate the value of CDS to city leadership / stakeholders? Do you have a recommendation for a first pilot, recognizing that every place is different? So I'll have you start with this one, Andrew, and I think Aileen would probably weigh in as well.
Say the question one more time, Angela. That's a good one. I want to make sure. So it's
yeah. What is kind of, how do you get started making the case to city leadership? Is there like a compelling use case or kind of like how to kind of build the argument that this matters?
Yeah. And in many ways, it's sometimes can be challenging to get started because if you're not actually able to measure or to assess what's happening at the curb today, it's hard to know definitively where the pain points are. But I think, either intuitively or anecdotally or actually kind of person out on the street, it's not too difficult to understand where the pain point kind of is felt the strongest around whether it's double parking for commercial deliveries, not having enough designated commercial space, or perhaps those designated commercial spaces are being taken up by Uber or Lyft pickup and drop off activity, or there's other types of curb activity that is causing these conflicts, whether it's blocking traffic or creating safety issues. So recognizing that, the pain at the curb is not felt universally across cities. Oftentimes it's in the more congested areas, the business districts, the center cities. So those are good places to look first. Where do you have the most people? Where do you have the most activity? And perhaps where do you know the least about your curb today? And the opportunity to take your, oftentimes rules and regs that may be in a spreadsheet, maybe in a GIS layer, maybe just what the sign or paint color says, and actually being able to create that digital inventory is a key first step. That digital inventory is incredibly powerful, whether you actually take the additional steps and manage the curb differently. Just knowing how your curbs are kind of managed through those regulations and rules can be a huge first step. And then being able to have that resource to update as those rules change. Because we know in almost every city, medium size, like larger, small, the curbs are incredibly dynamic. As cities are looking to introduce bike lanes or transit lanes or seating in that curb lane, that's going to change that inventory. And if you have the ability to more dynamically update a digital inventory, you're going to be far ahead. So that's at least a place to start, really identifying kind of where that pain point is and knowing you don't have to boil the ocean or eat the elephant in one bite. Start small, proof of concept that this can in fact work, and then build from there.
Thank you. I'd also say like one of the more effective strategies that we've seen too is just to align on some of those shared goals first, right? Like everyone, we all want our streets to be safer. We all want our air to be cleaner, and really kind of working backwards from those high level policy objectives can take something that's really complicated, like a data standard, and make it a little bit easier to understand. That you kind of, in order to get to those shared goals that we all have, we need more information, we need more tools. And that's really what it boils down to at the end of the day. Cool. Similarly, there's some questions about kind of like partnerships in here as well that I think are really interesting, and we get a lot. I'll start with this question from Mark, which is, once a municipal project is approved, so I guess assuming that that there's the will and the funding, how does the OMF support the city vendor implementation using CDS? So which I think could maybe also be a broader question, like how do we support vendors, but then also maybe some just general recommendations for how vendors can help support implementation.
I'll jump in for lack of a better word. So it really depends on some of the needs to support that implementation. And as we've identified today, even this 101 webinar, the Getting Started guide, these are steps to helping both the municipalities as well as the vendors better understand what CDS is and how to use it. The OMF, we're a small, kind of scrappy nonprofit. We're not resourced to do a lot of hands-on kind of technical assistance. We're certainly available to ask questions, and both through our working groups, public working groups, also via our GitHub repository. That's a great way of asking, posing questions or identifying some potential challenges or struggles that you may be having with your implementation journey. So as we're getting more into taking this theoretical concept of CDS and bringing it into reality with this group of smart grant cities that you heard about, or many of the other cities that are farther along on this implementation journey, we want to capture those learnings and turn them into resources like this that can be helpful for your implementation path as well.
There was one other question, kind of shifting gears back a little bit to more of the technical side. I think this is really important. I struggle to kind of just like understand how specs worked when I started the OMF, so this resonates with me. The question is, can you explain, like I'm 5 years old, how I would collect data for the the CDS Curbs API? I have a wheel, but what do measure and actually what do I measure and actually document? Like, let's just do the explain it to me like I'm 5 one more time, because I it is admittedly, or at least for me, it was a little hard to understand.
Yeah, I could try to do that. I think the 5-year-old level might be a little bit too young. Might have to be more like 15 years old, because this is a digital thing, so you're gonna need a computer, and you're probably gonna need some satellite images, which you can find for free online on Google and other places. You probably have people in your city that are Esri people. You probably pay for that service. There's also open source options. But really, what you don't really need a wheel. You don't even really need to be on the ground to get started with CDS. You probably already have some sort of existing asset management system that you could look at, or just look at the satellite pictures. But to get started, you're really just drawing out on satellite images approximate areas of where your dynamic curb zones are going to be. And you're making a digital version of that. You're doing a drawing of a polygon, a box around these areas. And then CDS, you still have to get that from that image into the CDS API format. So that's where it becomes a little technical up front to make it easier on the back end. So once someone in your planning department has defined where you want all these zones to be, you can hand it off to someone in your IT department, or someone, a vendor in our CDS ecosystem, to handle that for you. So I don't know if that's 5-year-old levels, but it's meant to be flexible. It's meant to be lightweight. It's meant to sit on top of your existing stuff. So yeah, hopefully that helps.
Awesome, thank you. And one last question that I will just attempt to answer very quickly. There's a couple more in here that we won't quite get to, but again, we'll do our best to kind of have those answers offline. Last question is around the like our familiarity with European standards and legal requirements. I just want to call out the other data standard that we steward, the mobility data specification. We have a very extensive guidance on our website about how to use MDS in a GDPR compliant manner. There's also similarly privacy guidance for the curb data specification, but because it functions a little bit differently, there's not quite as robust of GDPR guidance, because much of CDS addresses kind of cities publishing their own regulatory policies digitally. But yes, we're also very fortunate to have a European board member, and have been focusing more and more of our work on kind of connecting the dots between European and US cities, and sharing learnings. It's really interesting when it comes to curb, because there's so many differences, but there's also so many opportunities for us to learn from each other. So we're excited to kind of keep that going.
Angela, one point, and I know it was made earlier, but just wanted to reemphasize, because So there's a couple questions in there about, so what are some of the limitations, or what are some of the kind of downsides, or, I heard that and sort of spun it and said, one of the things that the value of CDS isn't just really felt or derived by any one city. It's really meant to be a standard that spans across geographies, whether it's within North America or in Europe or beyond, because curb users don't recognize city boundaries. Curb users may live in one city, may work in another city, may play in another, and so they want to be able to access those curb rules and regulations in a standardized format, so that it's really easy, regardless of what city you're in, the format of the data. Even though the rules and regs may differ by city, the format of the data and the way you access it can be standardized and consistent. It really tries to level or eliminate some of those kind of artificial barriers that are represented by municipal boundaries.
Thank you. Thank you all for joining us. You will receive a packet of information in your email that includes the slides, a recording of this webinar, as well as many of the resources that we discussed. And yeah, we hope that you'll stay tuned for new versions of this webinar for CDS 201 and to continue kind of connecting with us. So really appreciate it. And thanks to our team for sharing your expertise with everyone. Have a great day.